Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial. I will be making a Vanellope Von Sweets costume for my 2-year-old daughter for Halloween. Wreck-It Ralph is one of my favorite movies, so I was excited to put this all together, also knowing that this was most likely going to be a very easy costume. The hardest part of this tutorial is going to be the color blocking, which we are going to do first on our leggings. There are easier ways to go about it, but I really wanted it to look nice and put together. So I took the little extra time to do that extra step. And these leggings come from a PDF pattern. So taking the legging pattern piece, I'm going to trace out 2 of each side onto cardstock paper so that I have 4 pattern pieces all together. So first things first, I'm going to sketch out where I want the placement of the stripes to go on each leg. So I'm going to make the left leg have 5 white stripes and the right leg will have 4 white stripes. I used Vanellope's picture as reference to what kind of angles I wanted the stripes to be on each leg. These stripes are really going to depend on what size you're going to be making your leggings to be, whether it's for a child or for an adult, which is why I didn't do exact measurements, because this can vary for different sizes on how spaced out and how big you want each stripe to be. Once I'm happy with the placement of where I want the stripes to go, I'm going to draw out the width of each stripe that I want. This is definitely going to look way more complicated than it is. It felt really complicated while I was doing it, but now watching it back in the video, everything makes a little more sense. When I was drawing out, I had no idea how I was going to explain what I was doing, but the basics are actually quite simple. The left leg is only going to have white stripes, so I'm going to use a colored pen and mark the definite pattern for the stripes once I'm happy with it. Going back to the right leg, I'm going to mark where I want the pink stripe to go in between my white stripes. And I'm going to mark that with the black pen as well once I'm happy with the placement of the white stripes and the pink stripes. So the first thing we're going to do with this pattern is we're going to add a seam allowance to the white stripes. So I'm basically adding a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to mark this seam allowance with a different colored pen to help with confusion. I'm also adding a 3/8 inch seam allowance to the white stripes on the left leg. And I will mark these as well with a different colored pen. Then we're going to cut these pieces apart at the seam allowance lines. Go ahead and cut out your white stripe pieces, and you'll just need 1 of each. Taking my second legging pattern piece for the right leg, I'm going to redraw the original stripes. So I'm going to cut off the seam allowances that I had added on both sides and reline up those white stripes on the new pattern piece. You can use a ruler to make sure your spacing is correct. And then I'm just going to mark the outline of each stripe. This time on this pattern, I'm going to mark a 3/8 inch seam allowance more to the green pieces. This is where it gets a little confusing, but if you want to color in each section, that might help a little bit as well. From here, you're going to cut on the seam allowance line for the green pieces. Go ahead and cut these ones out as well on your mint green fleece fabric. And just like the white, you're only doing one piece each. So once you line them up, this is what you should have so far. Since this is the right leg, we're also going to be adding the pink stripes. So going back to those 4 original white strip pieces that we used from the first pattern and marked our pink strips on, I'm going to add the 3/8 inch seam allowance to the pink strip lines. Then we're going to cut along these seam allowance lines, and this is the pattern piece we're going to use to cut our fuchsia strips. And it'll be one of each of these as well. Going back to our left leg piece, we're going to cut out our white strips for the left leg along those seam allowance lines. And we'll cut out one piece of each in the white. And then just like last time, we are going to replace them on your second pattern piece for the left leg. And since my white strips are only going to be 1 inch wide, I'm basically going to cut down the middle of each strip for the green pieces. But if yours is much wider, then you want to repeat like you did with the right leg and add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to the green sections. And once again, we're going to cut out one green piece for each. And this is what it'll look like all lined out. Now we're going to connect these strips together. Starting with the top 2, you're going to fold the white strip over the green with right sides together, lining up that bottom edge and pin it. Then open it back up, grab the next strip and line that up with the bottom of the white piece with right sides together. Then you can pin that. You're just going to repeat this pattern all the way down so all your pieces are connected. You will also do the same thing to your right leg pieces. I'm going to sew each strip together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Going back to the right leg and the fuchsia strips we cut out, you're going to fold them in half with wrong sides together lengthwise, and we're going to sew this with the 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to grab my scissors and just cut off any excess seam allowance so I can get as close to that stitch as I can. I don't want too much fabric to be hanging over. Placing each fuchsia strip where it's supposed to go, I'm going to sew it down in the middle, sewing down both edges of the strip. Make sure that the seam is tucked neatly underneath. Once they're sewn on, you can cut off any excess hangover. Turning your legging pieces wrong side up, we're going to hem the bottom edge by folding it over 1/4 inches, and we'll sew this with the 1/16 inch seam allowance. Taking each leg piece, you're going to fold it right sides together, matching the long edges, and we'll pin these together. Sew these with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So you should have two pieces that look like legs now. Take one of your legging pieces and turn it inside out, and we're gonna place the legging right side out inside of the inside out leg. And you're going to line up the edge that is going to be the crotch area, matching the corners and the seam. And we'll sew this together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Go ahead and pull the legs right side out. This pattern specifies the size waistband to cut out, which is basically a rectangle. And I'm going to fold this in half with right sides together. And I'm going to sew the edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to fold this in half lengthwise with wrong sides together to create our band. Fold the band at the seam so you can figure out the front seam and place the pin. And then match the pin with the seam, and you're going to place a pin for each side. We're going to match up the seams from your leggings and your waistband with raw edges facing toward the top and pin these together. Match the front seam on your leggings with the back seam of your leggings so you can find the sides of your leggings and place a pin to mark those as well. And then from here you're just going to match up the front seam with the front pin and the side pins on your leggings with the side pins on your waistband. Sew this together with the 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure to hold the waistband taut while you sew so that it lines up nicely with the top of your leggings. It will look like you have more fabric on your leggings, but it'll stretch out enough to fit perfectly. And your leggings are done. The next piece we're going to work on is the sweater, and this is a PDF pattern from a different company, and this one is actually free, which is pretty nice because it's actually a really great pattern. Starting off with your pockets, you should have a lining piece and your main fabric piece, and you're going to lay these right sides together. Sew these edges with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, leaving the bottom edge open. Cut off some of the excess fabric on the corners, and this will help your points stick out nicely when we flip it inside out. You can use a chopstick or a pencil to help you poke those corners out nice and neat. We're going to do a 1/16 inch seam allowance top stitch over those short diagonal edges. Taking the front bodice piece with your right side face up, find the center with a ruler, and you're going to measure 1.25 inches from the bottom edge and pin this together. We're going to sew that open edge down at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Fold your pocket up so it's nice and neat. And pin it down at the top. And we're going to sew a 1/16 inch top stitch seam allowance across the bottom edges and the top straight edge. Next, we're going to grab our sleeves. Determine the shorter curve, which should be the lower point on the top of the sleeve. And you're going to place the sleeve right side together with your top bodice, matching the curve of the sleeve. Pin this together and do the same to the other side. Then taking our back bodice piece, open up your sleeves again, and you're gonna attach these so that they're right sides together with your back sleeve curve on both sides. Sew all 4 of these with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to fold this in half, matching your front and back bodice piece. Then match the edges of the sleeves, the seams, and the sides of the bodices. Pin these together and sew it with a 3/8 inch seam allowance down both sides. Grab the wrist cuffs and the waistband and fold these in half widthwise. And we'll sew these edges together with the 3/8 inch seam allowance. And just like the last waistband, we're going to fold these lengthwise with wrong sides together. Grab your sweater, still inside out, and tuck in each cuff matching the raw edges and the seams. You can go ahead and pin these in place. And then for the waistband, we're once again going to determine the front and the sides as well by folding it in half both ways and placing a pin on all the ends. I'm going to match my seam with my side seam to give it a neater finish, and then match the other 3 pins, the other side seam, and the front and back center. Sew all of 3 of these on with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So now your sweater looks like it's starting to come together. Grab your hood lining and fabric pieces, and we're going to open these up and you're going to lay them right sides together. We're going to sew the curved edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Turn the fabric hood right side out. And we're going to lay this inside of the lining hood, which should still be wrong side out. Match your seams and your edges for the front of the hood and pin these together. Sew this edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to open up that short bottom edge on both sides. We're going to match these right sides together, matching your seams, and pin this as well. And we'll sew this little edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. From here we can turn our hood right side out and tuck your lining in right so that it's positioned correctly. And I'm going to sew a channel for our rope with a 5/8 inch seam allowance around the front of the hood edge. Take the sweater and turn it inside out, and you're going to tuck your hood in right side out, matching the raw edges and your front and back seams. gonna sew this on with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now we're gonna add our medium twist cord for the hoodie ties. I'm gonna use my seam ripper and I'm just gonna make a tiny little hole. Be very careful and go slowly because this can turn into a very big hole very quickly. And I'm placing this about a 1/2 inch from that center seam on the bottom. You're gonna do the same thing on the other side, trying to make them even. And I go back with scissors just to make it a little bit bigger. I'm just gonna make this big enough for the twist cord to go through. Fleece is pretty awesome. It makes it easy to not fray, and the hole shouldn't continue to grow through use either. I'm gonna grab a safety pin and I'm gonna place that on the end of my twist cord. The end of the twist cord does have tape to keep it held together. And I'm just gonna start threading the twist cord through all the way around and have it come out the other end. Once it's threaded through, I'm going to determine the size I want. I'm going to leave the amount of twist cord I want on the ends, and then I'm going to tie a knot on both sides. I'm going to snip off the excess, leaving about 1/4 of an inch. And using a lighter, I'm just gonna melt the threads just a little bit to keep them from fraying and falling apart. Going to my smaller twist cord, I'm going to now use that for the stitches on the pocket. So I'm just going to use a marker and mark where I want each of the points I want to put the thread through. Once again, using a Vanellope picture and kind of eyeing where she has hers. Once again, I'm going to use my seam ripper to just poke the initial hole. And then going in with some small sharp scissors, I'm just gonna make the tiniest of snips where each hole is till I can get the tip of the scissors through the fabric. I'm using a very small twist cord for this, so I don't need that big of a hole. I'm gonna do this like I would if I were sewing with a needle and thread, with tape on the end to give it a firmer point. I'm gonna start from the inside, poking out, and then going across. And then up again, going back down inside the sweater. So the first one I'm creating is a little X, and then the last two will just be stitches across. But I will end up with the end on the inside of the sweater. I'm going to adjust the stitches to make sure they're not too tight. I want to make sure I leave a little bit of room for it to move so it doesn't bunch up the fabric too much. And then once everything looks good, I am going to tie off the end again with a knot on both sides. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess twist cord and use a lighter to melt the threads a little bit. And your sweater is complete. The next piece for this tutorial is going to be the skirt. And for this one, I just took my daughter's waist measurement and multiplied it by 3 and then added an inch for seam allowance. So going in with some dark brown cotton fabric, I'm going to cut a length of 1 yard and 22 inches. And then I've just folded it in half to make it easier. First one, I'm going to cut a 9-inch wide strip by the 58 inches. And then a 6-inch wide strip by the 58 inches. I am also going to cut the same length for the inner facing. I just didn't add the 1-inch seam allowance. And folding this in half as well, I'm going to cut 2 4-inch wide strips by 57 inches. I'm going to take one of my fabric strips and I'm going to lay out the inner facing strip a 1/2 inch inward from the short edge and 3/8 inches below the top. And then I'm going to iron this down all the way across. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other strip of fabric as well. I'm going to hem up the bottom by folding it over 3/8 inches and ironing it down. And then folding it over again another 3/8 inches and ironing that down as well. You're also going to do this to the other strip. And we're going to sew this down with a 3/8 inch seam allowance or just before the edge. On each strip, I'm going to mark 1-inch increments on the top and bottom all the way across. Next, we're going to start folding and ironing this down like an accordion. So I'm going to start by folding over the 1/2 inch seam allowance first. And then I'm going to fold it the opposite way at the first 1-inch marks. Then I'm going to fold it back the other way at the next 1-inch marks and iron this down. And then fold it over the top at the next 1-inch marks. And you're just going to continue this all the way down to the other end. And you will do this to the other strip as well. Going back to the 58-inch piece of fabric we cut earlier, we're going to cut out the waistband, and I'm just cutting out a 2.5-inch strip by 58 inches. Start by folding over one of the edges 3/8 inches and iron it down. Then you're going to take your large strip and lay it out with the raw side on top and right side face up, and you're going to place the smaller strip the same way right on top, lining up the raw edge. Adjust your folds so they line up, and we're going to sew that raw edge top together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Lay this right side up and then take your waistband and you're going to match the raw edge of the waistband with the top of your skirt and pin this together. Sew this with the 3/8 inch seam allowance. Fold your waistband up away from your skirt. You're gonna fold the top folded edge down toward the seam that you made and iron it in half. We're going to sew the waistband down with a 1/16 inch seam allowance from the inner edge. Cut one piece of elastic to your waist measurement, so I'm going to be using a 19-inch piece. Add a safety pin to the end and we're going to thread this through the waistband. Pin the other end to the edge of the skirt once it gets close enough. This will keep it from getting lost inside. Match all 4 open edges, right sides together, making sure you can see the elastic at the edges. And we're going to sew this together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Adjust all your little ruffles and folds and your skirt is done. The last part of this tutorial is the hair pieces. And starting with the candies and some bobby pins, and I'm using child-sized bobby pins. You're just going to take a hot glue gun and you're going to hot glue these on to the straight edge of your bobby pin. For the licorice hair tie, I'm using a large red twist cord. I did about a 10-inch piece and I'm going to mark off the end with a piece of tape, and this is where I'm going to cut it in half, and this will keep it from unraveling. I'm going to take some floral wire and I'm going to measure out about the same length. Take one end of the floral wire and stick it in between the center of the end there. And since this is twist cord, we can pretty much just turn it around the wire and it'll neatly place the wire in the middle. So it's nice and easy. Once I get to the other end, I'm going to cut off some of that extra wire and tuck that end up inside as best as I can. I'm going to use a lighter to melt the threads together to help it to keep from unraveling a little bit. And I'm also going to put a little bit of hot glue on the end and spread it with the needle. Since this inside is made with a type of yarn, I really want to enforce it so it doesn't unravel. And now you can tie this around into a little twist tie. So there you have 4 little mini tutorials inside one big one. And most of the time As far as cosplay goes, this is what usually people do by picking and choosing different patterns or projects to create one piece. And I don't think any of these are specifically hard. It just takes a little practice and a little patience, and I think this is actually a pretty easy costume. And it is pretty quick to put together, besides mapping out your color blocking for your leggings. I'm happy that my daughter will look so cute in this outfit, as well as still be nice and warm, which is very important since it gets pretty cold here during Halloween. So I hope some of this tutorial, if not all, was helpful for you. I'm really happy with the way everything turned out, as well as super glad that I got it done on time. I will leave all the websites and patterns linked down below for you, as well as my daughter's measurements, so you can compare when making your own. So I hope that you take the time to subscribe and hit the little bell so you get notified when I upload. Thank you all so much for watching again, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye!